It's funny how quickly the city noise fades. One minute you're stuck in traffic, horns blaring, the guy in the next lane blasting music that rattles your fillings, and the next silence. Or, not silence exactly, but a different kind of sound. The hum of tires on asphalt giving way to the crunch of gravel, then the whisper of wind through pines, the distant chatter of a squirrel. It's the kind of quiet that feels loud at first, pressing in on your ears after years spent filtering out the urban cacophony. My name is Alex Miller. Until last week, my life revolved around spreadsheets, lukewarm coffee, and the fluorescent hum of an office building downtown. Excitement was finding a parking spot less than 3 blocks away, or the vending machine actually having the chips I wanted. Ben Carter, my best friend since high school, lives a different kind of life, more hands-on, more. He suggested this trip. Actually, suggested is putting it mildly. It was more like a decree issued over beers one Thursday night. "We need to get out, man," he'd said, slamming his mug down with enough force to make the table jump. Properly out. Deep woods. No cell service, no people, just us and the trees. I'd hesitated. My idea of camping usually involved a pre-booked site with running water and maybe even Wi-Fi if I was lucky. Deep woods. Like deep. The deepest. Ben grinned, that familiar glint in his eyes that meant he was already picturing himself as some kind of modern day mountain man. I got a spot marked out, miles from anywhere. It'll be an adventure, Alex. Clear the head. Reset. He wasn't wrong about needing a reset. The job was soul-crushing in its monotony. The city felt like it was closing in, all concrete and exhaust fumes. Why? Ben had his own pressures, something about a big project at work, hinted at troubles with his girlfriend, Sarah, but he always seemed to handle stress by seeking out more intensity, not less. Me, I preferred a quiet night with a book. But the idea of escaping, of breathing air that didn't taste faintly of bus exhaust, was undeniably appealing. Plus, Ben and I hadn't done anything, just the two of us, in ages. Life gets in the way, you know. So I agreed. I bought a better sleeping bag, borrowed a sturdier backpack from my cousin, and tried to absorb Ben's crash course on map, reading and water purification like I was cramming for a final exam. The drive took hours, transitioning from highways to state roads, then to winding county lanes where the pavement grew progressively more cracked and potholed. Finally, Ben turned onto a dirt track barely wider than his truck, marked only by a faded wooden sign with lettering too weathered to read. Branches scraped against the windows as we bumped along, the truck groaning in protest. "Getting away from it all," Ben said, looking immensely pleased with himself. "Are we sure this is a road?" I muttered, gripping the dashboard as we lurched into another rut. "It's on the map," he said confidently, though he hadn't actually looked at the paper map spread across the console in at least half an hour. My phone had lost service about 40 minutes ago. Ben's claimed it still had 1 bar, but I suspected it was lying out of habit. We parked where the track dissolved into an overgrown footpath choked with ferns. Stepping out of the truck, the air felt different. Cooler, cleaner. Thick with the smell of damp earth and pine needles. The silence was profound, broken only by the sighing wind and the distant cry of a hawk. It was beautiful, undeniably, but also vast, intimidating. We shouldered our packs, mine felt like it weighed a ton, while Ben swung his on like it was empty and started hiking. Ben set a brisk pace, whistling tunelessly. Why? Pointing out different types of trees and animal tracks with the air of a seasoned guide. I mostly focused on putting one foot of the other and trying not to trip over roots. The woods grew denser as we walked. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy, overhead dappling the forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The path became less distinct, sometimes disappearing altogether, forcing us to push through underbrush. Ben consulted his compass periodically, nodding to himself. I just followed, trusting his confidence, though a small of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. This felt significantly more remote than any place I'd ever been. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 3 hours, Ben declared we'd reached the spot. It was a small clearing near a sluggish, dark water stream. Tall, ancient-looking pines ringed the space, their upper branches lost in the gloom. Perfect, right? Ben beamed, dropping his pack with a thud. It's quiet, I said. It was more than quiet. It felt unnaturally still. The usual forest chorus birdsong. Insect buzz seemed muted, almost absent. We set up camp, pitching the tent, unrolling sleeping bags, gathering firewood. The familiar rituals felt grounding, pushing back the young knees that prickled at the edges of my awareness. Ben got a fire going quickly, his movements efficient and practiced. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky above the treetops in shades of bruised purple and orange, we sat by the crackling flames, eating rehydrated chili that tasted surprisingly okay. Told you this was what we needed, Ben said, poking the fire with a stick. Yeah, it's peaceful, I agreed, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed to deepen and writhe just beyond the firelight. The woods felt different at night, bigger, older, watchful. We talked for a while, work, mutual friends, memories from school. The easy camaraderie felt good, familiar. But as the last light faded and the stars began to prick the darkening sky, that sense of stillness returned, heavier this time. The fire crackled. The stream murmured nearby, but beyond that, nothing. No rustling in the undergrowth, no owl hoots, no distant coyote calls. Just a heavy, expectant silence. Weird how quiet it is, I commented, trying to sound casual. Ben shrugged. Deep woods man. Animals are probably bedded down. He yawned. Think I'm gonna turn in soon. Big day tomorrow. Want to explore upstream. I wasn't tired, not really. The silence, the isolation, it was putting me on edge. But I nodded. Yeah, sounds good. Ben crawled into the tent, and soon his steady breathing filled the small space. I stayed by the fire, feeding it small sticks, watching the sparks spiral up into the darkness. The woods pressed close. A wall of blackness just beyond the flickering orange light. I felt incredibly small, exposed, I told myself it was just city nerves, unfamiliarity with true wilderness. But it felt like more than that. A low-level hum of wrongness vibrated just beneath the surface of the quiet. I must have eventually dozed off by the fire, because I woke with a start, the embers burning low. The air was cold, biting. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was just past 300 a.m. The silence was absolute now, so deep it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Stiffly, I got up to add more wood to the fire. As I reached for a log from the pile we'd gathered, my hand brushed against something smooth and cold embedded in the rough bark. Frowning, picked up the log, turning it over in the dim firelight. It wasn't part of the wood. Fused seamlessly into the side of the thick pine log like it had grown there was a sphere. It was about the size of a golf ball, perfectly round and made of a material I couldn't identify. It looked like obsidian, maybe, but felt wrong, too smooth, almost slick, and unnaturally cold to the touch, despite being near the fire's warmth. There were no seams, no marks, no indication of how it had gotten there. It was just up in the wood, an impossible intrusion into the log's grain. I ran my fingers over it. The transition from rough bark to the sphere's flawless surface was jarring. It didn't look carved or inserted. It looked like the wood fibers themselves had warped and flowed around this perfect, black orb as the tree grew, accommodating its presence. But that was impossible. This log wasn't some ancient, mutated tree. It was just a piece of deadfall, like dozens of others scattered around the clearing. A chill, entirely unrelated to the night air, traced its way down my spine. I held the log, turning the sphere over and over, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't natural. It couldn't be. It felt alien, wrong, a piece of geometry too perfect for the messy, organic reality of the forest. I looked around the clearing, suddenly hyper-aware of the oppressive silence, the depth of the shadows between the trees. Was this what felt off? This intrusion? My heart started beating faster. I thought about waking Ben, showing him this bizarre object. But what would I say? Hey, look at this weird ball I found in the firewood. He'd probably laugh, tell me it was some weird fungus or a geological anomaly I didn't understand. He'd rationalize it, just like I was trying desperately to do myself. But looking at the smooth, black sphere nestled impossibly in the wood, rationalization felt flimsy, inadequate. This thing shouldn't exist. Not here. Not like this. I dropped the log back onto the pile as if it had burned me. The sphere landed facing down, hidden again within the stack of ordinary firewood. But I knew it was there. A small, perfect piece of impossibility, sitting silently in the heart of the deep, quiet woods. And, suddenly, the silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like it was holding its breath. Sleep didn't come easy after finding that thing. Every creak of the tent fabric, every rustle of wind outside sounded amplified, sinister. I kept picturing the smooth, black sphere nestled in the log, a perfect, cold intrusion into the natural world. It felt like a splinter in my mind, something fundamentally out of place. When dawn finally filtered through the tent walls, painting the canvas a pale gray. I felt exhausted, gritty-eyed, but also wired with a nervous energy. Ben was already stirring, stretching with a groan. "Morning, sunshine," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Sleep okay?" "Not really," I admitted, sitting up. My back ached from sleeping awkwardly by the dying fire for part of the night. "Hey, Beng, there's something I need to show you." He raised an eyebrow as I crawled out of the tent and headed straight for the firewood pile. I hesitated for a second, then picked up the log I dropped last night. I turned it over, revealing the sphere. "What the hell is this?" I asked, holding it out. Ben squinted at it, then took the log from me, turning it over in his hands. He ran his thumb over the sphere, his brow furrowed. "Huh. Weird. Weird. Ben, it's fused into the wood. Perfectly smooth, perfectly round. It's freezing cold." He poked it again. "Probably just a burl. Some kind of weird tree growth." "Ben, look at it. It's like polished obsidian. And it's a perfect sphere. Burls aren't like that." "Okay. Maybe some kind of gall. Insect thing." He didn't sound convinced. He hefted the log. "Or maybe it's a meteorite fragment. Hit the tree years ago. And the wood grew around it. A perfectly spherical meteorite fragment that looks like polished glass." I pressed. "Came on." He shrugged, tossing the log back on the pile, though more gently than I had. "Look, it's weird, okay? Nature does weird stuff sometimes. Probably some mineral deposit thing. Let's get some breakfast. I want to check out that stream upstream. See if we can find the source." I felt a surge of frustration. He was dismissing it, rationalizing it away just like I knew he would. But his usual confidence felt a little forced this morning. He avoided looking directly at the log pile again. As we got the small camp stove going, Ben pulled out his compass to check the map again. He frowned, tapping the compass face. "Huh. Things acting up." I looked over his shoulder. The needle was spinning lazily, not settling in any particular direction. "Was it doing that yesterday?" "No," he admitted. "Must be some iron deposit around here messing with it. Weird place for it. Though." He put the compass away, pulling out his handheld GPS unit instead. Discovered why. "Good thing we've got backups." The GPS seemed to be working fine, acquiring satellites slowly but surely. Breakfast was instant oatmeal and coffee that tasted vaguely of plastic. The unnatural quiet of the woods persisted. A bird called out nearby, but the sound was flat, clipped, like a bad sound effect on repeat, lacking the natural resonance it should have had. I glanced at Ben, but he didn't seem to notice, focused on packing a day pack for our hike. We cleaned up the campsite, doused the fire thoroughly, and started walking upstream. Following the sluggish, dark water, the air felt heavy, stagnant. The usual background hum of insects was missing. Patches of silence felt deeper, more absolute than they should have. About half an hour into the hike, Ben stopped abruptly, pointing. "What the hell?" Ahead of us. Why, lying near the bank of the stream, was the carcass of a deer. That wasn't unusual in itself, but the way it looked at was wrong. It wasn't torn apart by predators. Its limbs were bent at impossible angles, joints twisted unnaturally. One of its antlers seemed to have grown into its skull in a smooth, impossible curve. There were no visible wounds, no blood. Just this grotesque distortion. Disease. Ben muttered, his voice tight. He poked it tentatively with a stick. Some kind of wasting disease. Never seen anything like it. He looked genuinely disturbed now, his outdoorsman bravado faltering. That doesn't look like any disease I've ever heard of, I said, my stomach churning. The image of the sphere in the log flashed in my mind. An intrusion. A wrongness. We moved on, unnerved, the silence pressing in even harder. The stream itself seemed off. The water flowed sluggishly, almost unnaturally smooth, and the reflections on its surface seemed delayed. Distorted, like looking into a cheap funhouse mirror. Then we saw the trees. On a slope rising up from the stream bank, a cluster of maybe a dozen pine trees stood, in a perfect grid pattern. Not just roughly aligned, but spaced with geometric precision, forming neat rows and columns like soldiers on parade. It was utterly unnatural, impossible in a wild forest. Okay, Ben said, his voice barely a whisper. That's not right. We approached cautiously. The ground beneath the geometric trees felt strange, subtly, spongy and yielding, where it should have been firm with pine needles and packed earth. Looking up, the branches seemed too symmetrical, the needles arranged in patterns that were just slightly too perfect. Ben pulled out his GPS again. He stared at the screen, shaking his head. This thing's busted now too. Says we're rigged 10 miles south of here. Now 15. Now back here. The location marker jumped erratically across the small screen. He turned it off with a frustrated sigh. Okay, Alex, I admitted. Something weird is going on. You think? My voice dripped with sarcasm born of rising fear. That sphere, the compass, the deer, the trees. The GPS picked this isn't normal, Ben. No kidding. He snapped, fear making him irritable. Okay, let's just dip, let's head back to camp. Forget exploring upstream. We pack up and we hike out, now. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by renewed anxiety. Yeah, good idea. We turned back, trying to retrace our steps along the stream. But the path seemed different. A fallen log I distinctly remembered stepping over wasn't there. A cluster of ferns looked subtly altered, their frowns arranged in that same, unnervingly perfect symmetry we'd seen in the pines. Ben pulled out his compass again, uselessly. It spun wildly, the needle dancing without direction. The landmarks, Ben muttered, scanning the trees. They're wrong. Orb shifted. Panic began to claw its way up my throat. We weren't just lost in the conventional sense. The woods themselves felt like they were changing around us, the rules bending. Suddenly, a wave of intense nausea hit me, so strong I had to double over, gagging. Beside me, Ben groaned, pressing a hand to his temple.
What is it?
Wake the sounds of the forest warped violently. The gentle murmur of the stream became a harsh, metallic grinding. Ben's groan echoed strangely, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. My own breathing sounded impossibly loud, then faded to nothing, as if the air itself refused to carry the sound. Just as the wave of disorientation began to subside, I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something dark and fluid, moving impossibly fast through the trunk of a large oak tree nearby. Not around it, through it. Like the wood wasn't solid at all. It was gone in an instant, leaving only the image burned into my retinas and the certainty that I hadn't imagined it. "Did you see that?" I gasped, pointing. Ben shook his head, still looking pale and disoriented. "See what?" "Alex, we need to get back. Now." We pushed on, driven by a primal fear now. The feeling of being watched intensified, but it wasn't the feeling of eyes on us. It was a sense-off awareness, like the forest itself. The wrongness, permeating it, knew we were there and was reacting. It took us far longer than it should have to get back to the clearing. We stumbled into it, hearts pounding, expecting I don't know what. Relief, maybe. The camp was there. Tent packs, the cold fire pit. But something was wrong. Scattered around the clearing, embedded in the trunks of the surrounding pines, were more spheres. Dozens of them. Identical to the one in the log. Small, black. Perfectly smooth, impossibly fused into the living wood. Some were near the base, others higher up. They dotted the trees like obscene, geometric fruit. And the log pile, the log with the original sphere, wasn't hidden anymore. It sat on top, and the sphere within it seemed darker, deeper. Almost like it was absorbing the faint daylight. It wasn't visibly pulsating, but I could feel a low thrumming vibration emanating from it. A sub-audible frequency that resonated in my bones. We weren't just lost. We were trapped. Trapped in the epicenter of whatever this ontological parasite was. And it was growing. Sources and related content, for a long moment, discovered why. Neither of us moved. We just stood there, frozen at the edge of the clearing, staring at the impossible sight of dozens of smooth, black spheres embedded in the pines, like some kind of grotesque infestation. The air hummed with that low, bone-deep vibration I'd felt earlier, stronger now, seeming to emanate from the entire clearing. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Ben made a choked sound, a half sob, half gasp. His face was pale, slick with sweat despite the cool air. The confident, capable outdoorsman I knew was gone, replaced by someone small and terrified. "Alex," he whispered, his voice trembling. What is this?" "I don't know," I said, my own voice tight. "But we can't stay here." Panic, cold and sharp, finally broke through the paralysis. We needed to leave. Not just the clearing, but these woods. Now forget the trail, forget the map, forget the truck. Just run. Anywhere but here. "Grab your pack," I urged, my voice low and urgent. "Just the essentials. Water, knife. Whatever food is easy." We scrambled towards the tent, moving stiffly, eyes darting nervously towards the sphere-studded trees. The ground felt subtly wrong underfoot, like walking on packed sand that shifted unpredictably. Inside the tent, our movements were frantic, clumsy. I shoved my water filter and remaining energy bars into my pack, fumbling with the straps. Ben did the same, his hands shaking so badly he could barely zip his bag. The log," he muttered, glancing towards the fire pit. "The first one up it feels louder." He was right. The low thrumming seemed centered on that specific log, the sphere within it pulsing with a darkness that felt like it was drinking the light. A focal point for the wrongness. Packs secured, we backed out of the tent. "Which way?" Ben asked, his eyes wide, scanning the perimeter of the clearing. Every direction looked the same: dense woods, trees marked with impossible spheres. "Away from the stream," I decided, pointing towards the opposite side of the clearing from where we'd entered. "Just push through. Keep moving." We started walking, almost running, towards the tree line. But as we approached the edge of the clearing, a wave of dizziness washed over me, far stronger than before. The world tilted violently. The trees seemed to sway and bend, their trunks warping like rubber. Ben stumbled beside me, crying out. It's moving," he gasped. It wasn't just dizziness. The geometry of the space itself felt fluid, unstable. We pushed forward, forcing our way between two pines that seemed subtly too close together now, and plunged into the undergrowth. Branches whipped at our faces. Thorns snagged our clothes. We half ran, half stumbled through the dense woods, driven by pure adrenaline. But after several minutes of frantic progress, pushing through thick brush that seemed to grasp and hold, we burst through back into the clearing. We stood exactly where we'd started, panting, staring at the tent and the cold fire pit. It was impossible. We'd been moving in a straight line away from it. "No," Ben whispered, shaking his head. No, Nogue." We tried again. Different direction, same result. Pushing through the seemingly solid wall of trees only led us stumbling back into the same cursed space. Like the woods outside the clearing refused to connect to it properly. The clearing felt like an island, adrift in a sea of warped reality. The humming intensified. The spheres on the trees seemed to lean, their surfaces swirling with oily, internal patterns. The air grew thick, heavy, making each breath feel like sucking mud. Nausea roiled in my stomach. Then the sound started. Not the flat, clipped bird call from before, but something worse. Whispers, just at the edge of hearing, seeming to come from all directions at once. They weren't words, not quite, but fragments of sound, distorted echoes of our own voices, twisted into mocking, meaningless syllables. "Alex Susk Frade Bang Nung Lost."
Stop it!
Ben yelled, clapping his hands over his ears.
Stop it!
The whispering intensified, swirling around us like phantom insects. My vision started to blur at the edges, colors bleeding into each other. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was vibrating, shaking loose the moorings of reality. We were trapped. The phenomenon wasn't just present. It was actively containing us, playing with us. Desperation clawed at me. We couldn't run. We couldn't hide. Maybe we had to fight back. It felt insane. Like punching fog. But what other choice did we have? "The spheres," I said, my voice hoarse. "They reg nodes. Connection points. Maybe if we destroy one." Ben looked at me, his eyes wild with fear, but a flicker of his old impulsiveness returned. Destroy it? How? I don't know. Rock. Knife. I scanned the ground, spotting a jagged piece of granite half buried near the fire pit. I lunged for it, my hand closing around its rough surface. Alex waits. Ben yelled, but I was already moving, fueled by terror and a desperate need to do something. I ran towards the nearest tree, towards one of the black spheres embedded about chest high. The humming intensified as I approached, the air growing colder. The whispers shrieked in my ears. I raised the rock, ignoring the screaming alarm bells in my head, and brought it down hard against the perfect, black surface. The impact was wrong. There wasn't a crack or a shatter. It felt like hitting solid steel, but also like plunging my hand into thick, cold syrup. The rock stopped dead, absorbed, and the sphere it pulsed. A wave of pure wrongness radiated outwards, hitting me like a physical blow. I staggered back, dropping the rock, gasping. The world dissolved into chaos. The visual distortions intensified tenfold. The trees didn't just warp, they seemed to fragment. Their textures flickering between bark, static, and smooth obsidian black. The ground churned like liquid. The sky above turned a sickening, oily purple. The whispers coalesced into a deafening roar of meaningless sound. But worse, far worse, was the glimpse it gave me. For a fraction of a second, the illusion of the forest peeled back. I didn't see a monster, not a creature of flesh and blood. I saw patterns. Shifting, complex, geometric patterns underlying everything, like the source code of reality. And they were glitching, corrupting. The sphere I struck wasn't an object in the tree. It was a point where the corruption was bleeding through, imposing its alien, broken logic onto our world. It was rewriting reality, one pattern at a time, and it was trying to rewrite us. I felt a tearing sensation inside my head, a pressure building behind my eyes, as if something was to force its way in, overwrite my thoughts with its own impossible geometry. I screamed, stumbling backwards, tripping over a root. Ben grabbed my arm, hauling me up. Alex, what did you do? His face was a mask of terror. The clearing was in flux. The spheres glowed brighter. The humming vibrated through my teeth. We soon discovered why. The very air seemed to crackle with energy. The phenomenon was reacting, angered or perhaps just stimulated. We have to get to the center. Ben shouted over the roar, pointing frantically towards the fire pit, towards the original log. Maybe that's the weak point. Or the control. It was insane logic, born of panic, but we had nothing else. We stumbled towards the center of the clearing, towards the pulsing log. The ground bucked beneath us. Trees seemed to lean in, their sphere eyes watching. We reached the fire pit. The log sat there, the sphere within it radiating cold and that awful, silent thrum. It looked like a black hole, drinking the distorted light. What do we do? I yelled. Ben didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the sphere. He reached out a trembling hand, as if mesmerized. Ben, no, I shouted, grabbing for him, but I was too late. His fingers brushed the surface of the sphere. He screamed. A raw, agonized sound that was cut off abruptly. His body convulsed, arching backwards. His eyes rolled up in his head, showing only whites. The humming surged, becoming a physical force that slammed into me, throwing me backwards. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. My vision swam. The roaring sound intensified, then suddenly cut out, replaced by an echoing silence, even deeper and more profound than before. I pushed myself up, shaking, my ears ringing. The clearing was stabilizing. The trees stopped flickering. The ground felt solid again. The oily purple sky faded back to a gloomy gray. The spheres on the trees dimmed, their internal swirling slowing. But bang, he was lying on the ground beside the fire pit, unnaturally still. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the sky. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and radiating from where his hand still rested near the log. Faint, geometric patterns, like fractal frost, were spreading across his skin. He wasn't breathing. The wrongness hadn't gone. It had just focused, concentrated, found a new host. I scrambled backwards, away from Ben's body, away from the silent, watching spheres. The silence was absolute. The woods were still. But the horror was louder than ever. I was alone, trapped. And whatever this thing was, it wasn't finished yet. Sources and related content, a time lost, all meaning. We soon discovered why. I don't know how long I lay there on the cold ground, staring at Ben's still form beside the fire pit. The chaotic energy that had ripped through the clearing moments before was gone, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The impossible spheres embedded in the surrounding pines were dull now, inert. Their inner swirling ceased. The low hum that had vibrated through my bones had vanished. It was just quiet. Terribly, unnaturally quiet. Ben. His eyes were open, fixed on the gray, overcast sky with a vacant stare. His skin had a waxy, unnatural pallor. And spreading from his hand, still resting near the log with the primary's fire, were those faint, intricate patterns, like frost creeping across glass. They weren't just on the surface. They seemed etched into his very being, a delicate, geometric tracery that pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence even in the dim light. It was obscene, a violation. Whatever the anomaly was, it hadn't just killed him, it had claimed him, rewritten him. A wave of nausea washed over me, bile rising in my throat. I scrambled backwards on hands and knees, crab walking away from the body, away from the silent, watching trees. My breath came in ragged gasps. Tears streamed down my face, hot and stinging. But I made no sound. The silence felt too fragile, too absolute, like a single sob might shatter it and bring the chaos roaring back. I had to get out. The thought hammered at my skull with frantic urgency. Get away. Run. Pushing myself to my feet on trembling legs, I risked a glance around the clearing. It looked normal again. Deceptively so. Just a small clearing in the woods, a pitched tent, a cold fire pit, a body. The spheres were still there. Silent sentinels in the bark, but the oppressive energy, the feeling of being trapped in shifting geometry, had lifted. It felt empty. Like the presence had withdrawn, satisfied, or perhaps simply dormant after consuming Ben. Could I leave now? Was the way out open? We soon discovered why. I didn't dare test the paths we'd tried before. My eyes fell on the sluggish stream bordering one edge of the clearing. Following water downstream usually leads somewhere, right? It felt like the only option that wasn't tainted by the earlier, impossible loops. What? Grabbing my pack, Ben's lay, forgotten near the tent. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I stumbled towards the stream. I didn't look back at Ben's body. I couldn't. Wading into the shallow, icy water, I started moving downstream. The cold shocked my legs. But the pain was grounding real. I kept close to the bank, pushing through overhanging branches, slipping on mossy rocks. Every shadow seemed to writhe with unseen movement. Every rustle of leaves sounded like whispers starting up again. My paranoia was a living thing, crawling on my skin. I kept expecting the world to warp again, for the stream to lead me back to the clearing, for the humming to start vibrating in my teeth. But nothing happened. The woods remained silent, still watching. Maybe the anomaly had let me go. Or maybe it didn't need to hold me anymore. Maybe I was carrying something out with me. Hours passed in a blur of stumbling progress and gnawing fear. Hunger gnawed at me. But the thought of stopping to eat was unbearable. Thirst was a fire in my throat, but I hesitated to drink from the stream, imagining the water itself tainted, corrupted. Eventually, desperation won, and I used my filter, gulping down the cold, metallic-tasting water. The landscape began to change subtly. The trees seemed less ancient, the undergrowth less dense. I heard the distant sound of birdsong, real, natural birdsong, not the clipped, flat imitation from the clearing. Hope, fragile and tentative, flickered within me. Then, through the trees, I saw it. A flash of unnatural color. Red. My heart leaped. I pushed through a final screen of branches, and there it was, Ben's truck. Parked exactly where we'd left it at the edge of the dissolving dirt track. It looked impossibly solid, mundane. A relic from a world I wasn't sure still existed. I practically fell into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys Ben had left in the ignition. The engine turning over, roaring to life in the quiet woods, was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I slammed the truck into reverse, spun it around, and floored the accelerator, sending gravel flying. I didn't slow down until the dirt track met paved road. Only then did I pull over, shaking uncontrollably, gasping for breath. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woods pressing close, spheres gleaming in the trees. Discovered why. But there was just an ordinary road winding through ordinary forest. The drive back was a silent agony. The silence in the cab felt different from the silence in the woods, empty, hollow, filled only with the engine's drone and the frantic pounding of my own heart. What had happened back there? What was that thing? And Ben, God, Ben. How could I explain this? What would I people, his family? Sarah, the police. We went camping. And my friend was killed by a geometric reality parasite that had fused fears into trees and etched fractal patterns onto his corpse after he touched one. And they'd lock me up, sedate me, dismiss it as trauma-induced psychosis. When I finally reached cell service, hours later, My phone buzzed frantically with missed calls and texts. I ignored them. I drove straight home, parked the truck, stumbled into my apartment, locked the door, and collapsed. The official story became vague, confused. Ben and I got separated during a hike deep in unfamiliar territory. I searched for days, got lost myself, eventually found my way back to the truck, exhausted and disoriented. A massive search and rescue operation was launched, of course. They scoured the woods for weeks. They found nothing. No sign of Ben. No trace of our campsite, no strangely marked trees. It was as if the clearing, the anomaly, Ben's body had never existed. Or perhaps the woods simply didn't want them found. They ruled it a tragic accident. Exposure, animal attack, a fall. They listed possibilities. But ultimately, Ben Carter vanished without a trace in the vast wilderness. His family grieved. Sarah was devastated. I attended the memorial service, numb, offering hollow condolences, the weight of my secret crushing me. How could I tell them the truth was infinitely worse, infinitely more insane than anything they could imagine? Life somehow went on, but it wasn't the same life. The city noise I used to hate now felt like a comforting blanket, drowning out the memory of that terrible silence. But the silence was still there, underneath. I have nightmares, of course. Vivid, terrifying dreams of shifting geometry, swirling black spheres, and Ben's vacant eyes staring up at me, his skin covered in those delicate, deadly patterns. Sometimes I wake up gasping, drenched in cold sweat, convinced the humming has started again in my own apartment. I see things, fleeting distortions at the edge of my vision, patterns in wood grain or textured ceilings that seem just a little too perfect, too symmetrical. Sometimes, when I stare into a reflective surface, a window pane, a polished countertop, I think I see a faint, fractal pattern overlaying my own reflection, just for a fraction of a second. Is it PSD? Lingering trauma manifesting as hallucinations? God, I hope so. Because the alternative is that I didn't escape clean. That a fragment of the anomaly, the ontological parasite, hitched a ride. That it's still with me, inside me, waiting, growing. I threw out anything made of wood from my apartment. I avoid forests, parks, anywhere with too many trees. I can't stand silence anymore. I always have music or the TV playing. But sometimes, late at night, when the city finally quiets down, I feel it. A faint pressure behind my eyes. A low thrumming, almost too low to hear, resonating not in my ears, but in my bones. Last night, I saw it again. Not in a dream. I was brushing my teeth, staring into the bathroom mirror. For just a second, beneath my own reflection, I saw it. A tiny, perfect, black sphere, seemingly embedded deep within the mirror's surface. It wasn't reflecting, it was there. And it pulsed, just once, with that familiar, light, drinking darkness. Then it was gone. Was it real? Am I losing my mind? Or is it starting again? Has it followed me home? I don't know. All I know is that I went camping with my friend, deep in the woods. We found something that shouldn't exist. And I think I brought a piece of it back. Sources and related content